Hey, and welcome back to Goal Oriented Episode 9. I'm your host, Chandler Engelbrecht, and I'm joined by Mason Young and Austin Curtright, and even Justin Jayne. We got the entire crew together for this podcast. Guys, Mason specifically, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing pretty well. Got a lot of things on the plate this week, but pushing through and very excited to talk a little OU football on this fine Tuesday afternoon.
Austin?
I'm alive and I'm here, so yeah, I'm here.
That's a really good start. You know who might not be alive is the Sooners playoff hopes because they
Jeez.
over the weekend.
Kill 'em.
Very bad game for them. Mason, why don't we break that down a bit?
Yeah, so game at Baylor on Saturday. We were there at McLean Stadium, which was honestly a really cool experience. We'll unpack that in full a little bit later on, but let's cut straight to the chase football-wise. OU lost 27-14. A very chaotic ending. The Sooners were down like 10-7 going into the fourth quarter, and then everything just fell apart. One play where a linebacker missed a gap, let Baylor's running back Abram Smith run for 75 yards. That turned into one touchdown, turned into two. Caleb Williams struggled in this game through two interceptions and got his hand stepped on by a Baylor defender. He was replaced for two drives by Spencer Rattler. OU wasn't able to make anything out of that. And overall, just a really poor game for the Sooners, which then ended by the Baylor fans rushing the field prematurely while there were still 3 seconds on the clock. And Baylor was trying to kick a field goal to help itself with the Big 12 tiebreaker between it and OU. And so OU had already sent most of its players to the locker room. They had to bring back 11 more guys for Baylor to kick it, finish the game. And then the fans stormed the field anew, and that became quite the safety hazard in Lincoln Riley's eyes.
Yeah, just a really wacky ending there. That I think that's the only term I can use to describe it. But more about the game itself, OU obviously gave up the most rushing yards to a running back. It has this season to Abram Smith, and then is it Gary? We never learned this.
We figured out that it is Gary after he ran for
Gary Bohannon.
That is the most yards OU has given up to a quarterback this season by far. Defense wasn't quite bad, but the offense just couldn't really help itself. You want to talk more about the offensive and defensive performance from the Sooners?
I figured out that his name is pronounced Gary, and it only took me watching him run for 100+ yards and 2 touchdowns against OU to do it. But first off, to talk about, obviously, the fans rushing the field early, the fact that the officials – this is a sports podcast. We're going to share our opinions. But the fact that the Big 12 officials made the team come back on the field for one more play after what was probably 5,000+ students were on the field – and they got relegated to the sideline in the corner for 3 seconds was the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. I thought that was just ridiculous. There's no reason that you need to bring the team OU back from the locker room onto the field for one play that presumably doesn't matter. Obviously, Dave Aranda said that he decided to kick the field goal for the tiebreaker opportunity. If OU is to lose one of their next 2 games, it would allow Baylor to have a potential spot in the Big 12 championship, or if there's a 3-way tie potentially for the point differential or whatever, which is like the second or third most important thing for that stat. But yeah, I think the biggest tale in this was just the offense. It was the lowest scoring output in the Lincoln Riley era. It was the lowest yard total in the Lincoln Riley era. And I think that's sort of why OU lost in this game. Defense held up fine. I think there's 3 or 4 different instances in the first half where Baylor had the ball in OU's territory, and they came out with 0 points. And, that's something that OU has definitely not done great with this season. And one of those bright spots was Brian Asamoah, who might have quite literally got himself drafted on Saturday. I think he ended up with 11 tackles, a tackle for loss, a tackle and a half for loss, and a forced fumble. But I think that's the story of this game, and that's where OU struggled.
A couple other notes on that. Dave Aranda currently has Lincoln Riley's number. 3 of the 5 lowest scoring games in the Riley era in terms of offensive output came with Dave Aranda either as defending him as Baylor's head coach, or one of those is the 2019 Peach Bowl where Dave Aranda was LSU's offensive coordinator. Also, Jeff Grimes, Baylor's offensive coordinator, he was on his stuff the other day because they had one play that OU could not stop. And I think the other side of that, too, is there were single plays like that Abram Smith run, and OU just caved when things like that happened.
This game was a bit closer than, Gary Bohannon is not the best passer. He's not a great passer in general, but there's multiple moments where I think of there's a play where I think it was Tyquan Thornton, but he had burnt DJ Graham, and DJ Graham was with like 15 yards away from him. Gary just completely, I missed it again. Gary completely missed him, and I feel like there's multiple moments there. Baylor struggled for their first offensive drive of the game. They got a 4th and 2 on their 2-yard line. OU got a stop, which is props to the OU defense there, but there's multiple missed opportunities for Baylor as well that could have really blown this game over even more.
Now, one place where they did maximize that was the play where Key Lawrence got burnt by Tyquan Thornton and he got a touchdown. There were a lot of plays with just like that were just mental errors that cost OU in the end.
Speaking of touchdowns, I'm still here. But Caleb Williams did not have a good game by any means. He got benched. He suffered a hand injury. I think this was the game, and we've gone back and forth on this, Mason. Yeah, we're like, he's a Heisman contender. He's not a Heisman contender. This eliminated that. Get benched again, even for injury reasons.
That's over.
Spencer Rattler came in, couldn't really do much. There was obviously his first throw was deep to Mike Woods, down the middle of the field, I believe. Might have been some PI.
If it was, that changes the complexion of that whole drive.
Because at that point, I still think it's 10-7, and one, it's really weird for OU to be in a 10-7 game in the third quarter in general. But that could have been just such a change. I don't know if that makes Rattler stay in the rest of the game and just light him up, but who knows? What did you guys see from Caleb Williams?
Yeah, I think that's just a tough environment. I think that's what we noticed from the start is McLean Stadium I think they opened in 2014, but just those games have been pretty hostile for OU, and it was nothing short of that on Saturday. And I think that was Caleb's obviously his second road start of his career, and we saw it at times even at Kansas and Lawrence with definitely not the same capacity or the same sort of vibe of fans in that scenario there, and he struggled on the road there for a little bit too. And I think he was maybe a little bit rattled. I think you think of the first drive of the game where OU elects to receive the ball, start first, and he takes 2 sacks and then forces a pass into double coverage to Jane Hazelwood and throws a pick. So I think there was multiple times where he was just trying to do too much. Obviously, Superman is his nickname. He just needed to, he just needed to hit a single, and he was trying to hit a home run on every play. I mentioned this to Mason in the box and Chandler, both in the box a few times, where Caleb was throwing the ball downfield for incompletions, and Kennedy Brooks was wide open on the other side of the field with like a wheel route that could have gotten them 60 yards at least on one play just from my own eyes. So I think he was just trying to do a little too much.
Again, he's a freshman. He didn't play his senior year of high school. I think he's still learning. That's what Lincoln said today in his press conference. He's like, I always try to critique him whether he throws 6 touchdowns in a game or he throws 2 picks in a game. Like, I don't really see a problem with necessarily Kennedy Brooks catching it, as more as I see just Williams not reading everything.
And Caleb is, obviously Caleb's young. He's done so many great things so young in his career that people think he's just perfect. And he's obviously a tremendously talented player, but 18-year-olds in any setting are going to struggle sometimes in roads like that. And that sort of brings up something interesting that was said today by Caleb Kelly, who talked to the media, and he said, Caleb Williams is a guy that can change a program. So I think OU fans should be excited that Caleb's getting these opportunities out of the way now before he gets to fully start a season as the QB1 probably next year.
Yeah, well, back to this year, though. This, like I said at the top of this, hurts OU's playoff chances, I think, quite a bit. ESPN released some stat the other day that said OU still has a 90% chance, and I was like, I don't think so.
Yeah, that's I calculated that. I think they re-released one that actually said it was like 24%, and that's actually below OSU, which is at 30%. So I think they might not have just updated their stats or something when I crunched that on Sunday, which is kind of annoying, but just a fact check.
Yeah, I really don't have a good feel for like, could they be in, could they be out? A lot has to happen. The thing I think that hurts them the most is how late this loss is in the season. Like, usually they lose a little bit earlier. Like in 2019, it was K-State at essentially like mid-season, and I think they had their bye, and then they came like right back after that. You have 2 games left, and you have to win both of those just to even get into the Big 12 championship game, much less make a college football playoff spot. So a lot has to happen. Other people in front of them have to lose. And as we've already seen, the College Football Playoff Committee does not like OU. They have not worked in their favor the entirety of the season. I maybe would posit that they're tired of watching them sneak in as like the 4 seed and get slaughtered by the 1 seed every time, with the exception of like the Georgia game. They were right in that in 2017 in the Rose Bowl. But by most accounts, it looks like they're out.
And I think what the difference is here for this season is obviously OU's made it as a 1-loss Big 12 champion, all their other appearances. But what's different about this season is across the full season body of work, OU has not really had that big game where they just dominated on every front of the ball. And obviously a loss this late in the season, I don't necessarily know if that hurts them that much, but the fact that they still – the one ranked team that the one really good team that OU's played this season they lost to is going to be considered a lot by the committee. Obviously, I think what helps OU in this case is that Baylor and Oklahoma State have exceeded expectations tremendously this season, and that will provide them a resume booster if OU ends up winning those games. If OU and OSU both win out, they will rematch in the Big 12 championship after playing the week prior. But Lincoln Riley has a tough test as a coach and has to get his team to make sure that 1 loss doesn't become 2 and 2 losses doesn't become 3 if it gets to that case. So I think that's the biggest storyline there.
Yeah, and I still think they can make it. I don't think that's completely out of the question, but the way Oklahoma State's playing right now, they're lights out, and they look like a team that, especially on their home field, where Caleb Williams has proven he struggles on the road in his 2 games, I think they could rout the Sooners.
How about that? 2 Oklahoma schools that are potentially playoff teams.
That's awesome. But I think a huge test for OU is just coming out and beating Iowa State handsomely. They have to put together some performance that says, hey, OU is still in this. Because if this is another game like the 2019 game or the 2017 game where they lost, I don't think OU can make that case even if they win the game.
And some people would like to think that Iowa State lost to Texas Tech last week. They also have a really bad loss against West Virginia. On the outside, people would think that like Iowa State will be flat and OU will just walk all over them. But the truth of the matter is, and players like Jeremiah Hall, Isaiah Thomas, other people have said this the entirety of this season, it doesn't matter who OU is playing. That opponent gives OU their best game. So this is every bit a challenge for OU this weekend, regardless of how much Iowa State has underachieved this season.
This is the same roster that took OU to the wire last season, the Big 12 championship, and upset them last season. It was the last loss OU had before Baylor, but in between their 17-game win streak. So it's majority of the same guys are back, same quarterback, star running back at Breece Hall. They've just underperformed this season, but the talent is definitely there, and they've done it before, and that's going to be a really tough matchup again for OU, nonetheless, the record.
You know what didn't underperform this weekend? The media meal provided by the good people in Waco, Texas. That was maybe top tier in terms of presentation. The food could have been just a little bit better, but that doesn't matter. They came out with, chicken and waffle sandwiches, and those were incredible. Mason even ate it. Mason ate the whole thing.
If Mason eats your media meal, it's a home run.
I've eaten the media meal.
Yeah, when it's chicken.
Everywhere we've been, the exception being the Cotton Bowl.
Good.
Another thing I enjoyed, just keeping on talking about Waco here, that stadium, you mentioned it was built just a couple of years ago. Absolutely fantastic. Hands
really
down,
cool.
one of the better press boxes I've been in. So,
other than the bar right in front of me where I couldn't see midfield. That was my lone complaint.
Backs into a river in the background, but before the game we were sort of complaining about the little bar that was in the window, so it kind of restricted our view a little bit of the field. But then right before the game started, they just started to retract the mirror up, the window up, and I was like, whoa, that's really cool.
I thought the whole thing was going to disappear. I was like, wow. But that, I think, almost wraps up our Waco talk. I do want to throw it to Justin Jayne really quickly. Justin, you were home this weekend, and from my understanding, you might be to blame for this OU loss.
Yeah, so for the audience who is unfamiliar with me because I've been AWOL the last couple weeks, I'm Justin Jayne. I'm the video editor here at The Daily, and this was the first game the entire season that I did not watch a single second of or cover. And yeah, I was very busy this weekend with other things. I am filming my capstone project, so that sort of monopolized my time this weekend, and the time that I did have free, I spent with my girlfriend, so I didn't watch the OU game. And yeah, this is also the first time they've lost, so correlation does not necessarily equal causation. However, please have mercy on me.
I'm just amazed in his few seconds on this podcast, he managed to throw in that he's working on a capstone project and that he has a girlfriend. That was way to maximize your time. Way to go. But with that said, the weekend's over. We had Lincoln Riley's press conference today. Today is Tuesday. I got to go. I had a Midway Deli sandwich. It was a great day. But Mason, let's toss it to you. What's the news of today?
Yeah, a couple things. One, Lincoln Riley shot down the rumors linking him to LSU.
Or did he?
Yeah, or did he? I don't know. It's
I don't know what to read from his response.
We can only continue to speculate, as everything has been. But like less than an hour before the press conference started, ESPN's Tom Luginbill got on some like weird radio show that I'd never heard of and was like, "Yeah, there's something going on at Oklahoma, and I wouldn't be surprised if Lincoln Riley became LSU's coach." And everybody was just like, "Dude, what?" Tom Luginbill is known for saying some weird stuff sometimes, so he said that. It was brought up at the press conference. Lincoln Riley said, no, like I haven't, nobody from my camp has contacted LSU. There's been no conversation about that. And he just said, I'm the head coach at the University of Oklahoma, and seems like by what he said, he feels pretty strongly about staying at OU. But we will continue some way, somehow, this rumor will continue to live on until LSU hires a new coach or he ends up being the new coach that they hired. So
who knows?
That's the part I found interesting about his response is that he never straight up said that he hadn't been in contact with them. He just said, I'm the coach at the University of Oklahoma, and you guys know what I think about this place. So,
right? I did notice that.
I'm not sure how to balance that. I'm sure it's nothing. I'm sure I'm just reading into it too much, but trying to read between the lines there, he didn't necessarily say he didn't talk to them. He just said he's the coach here and he loves this place. So
because you're telling me that Lincoln Riley never talked to the Dallas Cowboys, never talked to the Philadelphia Eagles, never talked to any of the other teams that he was speculatively linked to as a potential new coach.
If there's one thing we specialize at the Daily, it is overthinking everything we do, and I think this is exactly what we're doing here. I don't think he's leaving to LSU, considering the fact the school he's already at is going to the same conference in a span of 3 years.
Yeah,
I don't think so.
$4 million
they could pay him
pay
more
increase.
money, but I think that's the only case.
He's not
with that
going
said,
he's not going to LSU because he's becoming the next commissioner of the NFL. I'm
my
planting
God.
that theory here. Lincoln Riley to commish of the NFL.
He'd be awfully young.
Again, send all hate mail to @JustinJayne __ on Twitter.
Please do.
But let's wrap up the presser stuff. I thought the only other major thing to come out of today's press conference, other than the Midway Deli sandwich, was Caleb Kelly's status. Austin, you want to talk about that for a bit?
Yeah, that was a pretty sad one. Obviously, Caleb Kelly, who had torn his ACL in 2019, missed all this. Tore his ACL prior to the 2019 season, came back late, returned for 2020. Obviously, that's a COVID year. Tore his ACL prior to the season, missed all of that, and then 2021, he had played all season as a sixth-year senior until the Baylor game where he tore his ACL again. So he sort of had a little send-off, talked to the media for the last time, I'd imagine, today, and talked about a lot of things. One of my favorite stories he sort of talked about from today that I thought was interesting was while he was down on the ground and he basically knew that he had torn his ACL. He's like, this is it. Brian Mead, a fellow sixth-year senior linebacker, former walk-on, went over and was checking on him, and that was a pretty wholesome moment. But yeah, Caleb Kelly has done a lot in his OU career, sort of not necessarily the path that he thought he would take. He said, I kind of wished I had the Kenneth Murray path where I'm a 3-year starter and then I get to leave early and go first round because he was a former 5-star. But he went through injuries, moved positions, made a few big plays here and there. Some of the biggest plays in the last decade or so. I think of the forced fumble in the 2017 Rose Bowl that led to a fumble recovery touchdown by Stephen Parker. That's a big one. But he's played in a lot of games. He's Bob Stoops' last player that's actually played on one of Bob Stoops' coach teams. So, I'm pretty heartbroken for him. That's just a horrible ending to a career, Mason.
Yeah, and Saturday he is going to be on Big Noon Kickoff with his former coach, Bob Stoops, and I think that's just going to be a really wholesome moment that's going to bring a lot of closure to Caleb Kelly's story. But, yeah, what a career. And, even going to this season, made a really outstanding play against Texas, dislodged and recovered a fumble that helped OU take the lead a couple plays later, and team captain, he's been everything for this team in terms of a leader and example. He's graduating with 3 degrees. The best is ahead for Caleb Kelly.
Yeah, I agree with you guys. It's one of the sadder things to happen to OU football this season. Caleb Kelly is one of the players that's always stuck out to me. He's always very nice in press conferences and just seems like an overall really good guy.
Didn't shut down an NFL chance, though. Obviously, he said, I don't want to be 40 years old and look back and never at least tried. I'd rather someone just cut me and leave it at that than never try. So obviously he couldn't train for that this year because he'll be recovering for ACL tear. So he mentioned maybe he doesn't know his options yet, maybe figuring out how to possibly join OU staff as a GA or in recruiting or something to get another year's worth of scholarships so he can wait around and go through pro day next year. But that'll just have to unravel itself as the season goes on.
Yeah, and just adding to this from somebody who watches this dude spend I don't know how he has energy left for games watching him warm up on the field, because he's just always at the beginning of games like running around warming up with like every position. He's normally the last one to leave in that first unit. So I was really heartbroken when I saw that he was injured and out for this season. But he's somebody that I've been at the Daily since 2018. I've been covering football since 2019, and Caleb Kelly has sort of like been a constant presence on the field in one way or another. So I'm sure he'll still be there, and his spirit for the team will also still be very, very obviously felt. But it will be sad not to see him in uniform anymore.
It brings up sort of an interesting point that that you bring up is he mentioned today again that this was sort of a season where he knew it was his last, and he's taken a different approach to it, is what he said, is just trying to soak in every moment that he sort of has on his last go-around as a Sooner. He came back from the locker room without his uniform on, and that's when he said everyone sort of knew that, this was probably it for him. Naturally, they thought it was he thought that everyone thought he had a stinger at first, because he said he got a stinger in his shoulder in the first quarter early on, but he said that he got to address the team, and I'm sure that was a pretty somber moment.
Well, in an attempt to cheer us up, why don't we move on to the mailbag? I'm sure OU fans are quite chipper right now after last weekend. I'm sure they got tons of things to say. Let's just go with one here because we're pressed on time. This comes from Grant Hammonds on Twitter, and he just says, any of you can answer this. What the hell was that?
Yeah, I think that's the thing we're all wondering. It just was not. To be honest, though, we should have seen this coming, right?
Right.
Like in almost every game this year, the exceptions being like Western Carolina and Texas Tech, where it was just complete dominance. OU had kind of just skirted by, done literally just enough to win. And so eventually, when you're doing that and that's how you're playing and you're just doing enough, your luck runs out. And it definitely did against Baylor. So moving forward, they're going to have to figure out against Iowa State, against Oklahoma State, to figure out how to put together complete games. And if they really want to increase their college football playoff resume and potentially make a run at that, they're going to have to win both those games in dominant fashion, then go win the Big 12 championship game in dominant fashion. And that seems like quite the feat. I will be very impressed if they can do that.
Well, with that said, let's go ahead and just make a quick wrap-up here. Obviously, they play Iowa State this Saturday at 11 a.m. Iowa State boasts a top 10 defense, Mason, what is your prediction for the game, and what's a key takeaway?
Yeah, I'm going 37-31, the same score that Iowa State upset OU with during the regular season last season.
Are you going OU to win, though?
Yes, I will take
Okay.
OU to win by 6.
Okay.
But that was just the first score that popped into my head, so I'm going to take it.
What's your key to the game?
Yeah, key to the game. I contain Charlie Kolar. He was talked about a lot today at OU's press conference. He's actually a Norman kid from Norman North High School. Also went to high school with Austin.
Yep.
So
What?
yeah, his dad's a professor here at OU, engineering professor. Really nice guy. I've talked to him a couple times. And anyway, Charlie Kolar is this massive, like 7-footer tight end that gives OU problems every year, and they're gonna have to figure out how to contain him in this one. Last year, they put Robert Barnes at safety. Robert Barnes, no longer here, plays for Colorado now, was like 6'2" and like very big. He was a linebacker. They literally moved him to safety at the end of the season for like the express purpose of guarding Charlie Kolar. Mm-hmm. They have some bigger defensive backs this year, but I don't know they have anyone that has as much weight. Like the weight differential between Charlie Kolar and the other DBs is pretty big. So they're gonna have to find a way, whether it's you're trying to double team him. I don't know how you do that. Alex Grinch got to figure it out though.
Yeah,
All right,
it might
Austin,
be.
let's go to you.
Yeah. So, man, this is a tough one.
Start off with the score. Give me a good
I'm
score.
gonna go 34-31 OU. No, I'm going OU again. Depending on how they play this week, probably gonna go with OSU next week. But I think OU scrapes by the Cyclones in this one. And my key is gonna be improving the quarterback play. I think biggest struggle of last week's game was the offense. 27 points is, for OU holding a team to 27 points, probably pretty good chances that the offense is going to score enough to win, and that's not what happened. So I think that the offense is going to play a big role in this one. Iowa State boasts top 10 defense in the country in terms of total defense. So OU's going to have its hands full with a really, really talented defense that's been tough on teams all year. So I think that's the biggest key that I think is important for OU in this one.
Austin, I agree with a lot of things you just said. I'm also going to take OU in this one, but depending on how they win, if they do, next week's a different question. And I'm going to take them 40-28. I think they'll probably throw in a late touchdown to make this look like it was not as close as a game, even cover that point spread. But I think offensively, as you said, there needs to be a lot of improvement. And I'm going to go with the same key I had last week. Where were the wide receivers against Baylor? There was dropped passes. No one could really get open. I mean, Marvin Mims was quiet. Mike Woods had the PI play. If he catches that, it turns the tides of the game, potentially. We talked about that. So I think that they need a big performance, not only out of Williams, but out of that receiving core. And with that, I think that brings us to the last segment of our podcast. I will toss it back to Justin Jayne for the mystery question of
Georgia,
the day.
roll the jingle.
Mystery question. Yeah.
Okay. Mystery question time. So this one is a little bit on the fly. I came up with it yesterday. Normally I have them a little bit more in advance. But my question for you all is, if you could pick one figure from OU history, it doesn't necessarily have to be athletic, but obviously for the sake of the podcast, it would help if they were. But I'm not limiting it to football. An OU figure from the past to make a feature film about. Who would it be? And who would play them for bonus points?
Mason,
Well,
why don't you
Go ahead, Mason.
why don't you start? Your face was
I
very
have to
confused,
start?
so I want to hear what you have to say.
Well, one thing that I was just thinking about that doesn't pertain to this at all is in this podcast, we've committed a clear failure. We did not manage to establish a handful of words from the Horns Illustrated guys' question to start. That should have been the blueprint for this. I'm disappointed that the mystery question wasn't
We'll get it
about,
next
about
week.
that, but
We'll get it next
we
week.
have to work that in somewhere because that was
Who's your
outstanding
figure?
journalism.
Give me that one.
My figure. This is going to be very basic, but I'm just going to go with Barry Switzer. Like, I mean, that's
That's basic, but it's probably the best answer.
yeah. I mean, that's just they call him the king, and he's still around here for a reason. That's the premium era of OU football in a lot of respects, and he's still really loved and cherished around this community, and dealt with a lot of different players. Played in numerous games and really made a name for himself here in Norman, and he's still interesting. I mean, he's around. He's at Midway Deli like every day. I think eventually there's got to be a feature film about Barry Switzer.
Austin, you probably know more obscure OU athletes than anybody else I know. So I'm hoping you go really off the wall with this.
I'm not going to go off the wall, but I'm going to go with 100% my undisputed answer here, and that's Patty Gasso.
That was going to be mine.
Patty Gasso
would be good. It would.
I personally think undoubtedly Patty Gasso's the greatest coach in any sport in OU history. That's my opinion. Came to OU late 90s, and they were playing at Reeves Park, where I play softball with my mom now, and turned it into the stadium they're at now, Marietta Hines, and is now turning it into Love's Field, or that is going to come.
Love's Field is going to be sick
in the next few years, and she's won a ton of national championships, had one of the most dominant softball seasons of all time last year that me and Chandler got to cover all summer. That was really fun. But
it was a fun time.
I think it has to be Patty Gasso. She's a blast to cover her teams. Her teams beat the hell out of everyone, and she's completely turned that softball program around.
While we wait on Chandler to answer, I'm gonna say my casting for these so far. I'm gonna say Barry Switzer. This could be a controversial opinion based on looks, but I think the vibe would be right. Woody Harrelson.
Yeah, I think Woody Harrelson fits. I picture in my head, like, I feel like I've seen him play a football coach in another movie before, but I don't remember what movie it is. But
I'm feeling Harrison Ford for Barry Switzer. What about that?
That could also work.
He's too old now,
but it looks right.
Woody Harrelson is just young enough that I think he could play prime Barry Switzer and current Barry Switzer. Harrison Ford is far too old. That man breaks his leg every other week.
Diverging from that for a minute, what if we did a documentary about Longar?
No.
Is that a real player?
Why not? Yeah.
And ignoring that,
former basketball player Longar. I like that idea.
Who would play Patty Gasso? I'm going to go with Vera Farmiga, who is in the Conjuring series. She was most recently seen in Many Saints of Newark. I think she's a spitting image of Patty Gasso, and she's a great actress.
I've seen the first Conjuring, but I can't make out her face. Like, that doesn't register. So.
All right, I've thought of my obscure one. I'm going to go Drew Allen. Justin, do you know who Drew Allen is?
Not a clue.
He was the quarterback behind Landry Jones. The only thing I know about him is that Jim Ross, WWE Hall of Famer no less, once tweeted, "I wish my son was like Drew Allen."
Why didn't you pick your feature film over Jim Ross?
I don't think Jim Ross went to OU. He went to Northeastern State. But shout out to Tahlequah.
Who cares?
You want to do Drew Allen, but you won't do Longar.
I don't know who Longar is.
This is a fun fact.
Look it up.
We could have done Buster Rhymes.
Hans Polya.
Well, like all good mystery questions do, we are now way over time. So let's go ahead and wrap it up there. I've been your host, Chandler Engelbrecht. You can follow me on Twitter at CT Engelbrecht. I forgot to say that last week. Not forgetting this time. Mason, how can we follow you?
Did you take a hit from Perry on Winfrey, blindside block
I might
from
have just forgotten
Willis, or have Caleb Williams throw a football at you?
Caleb Williams throw a football after me after that performance.
No. Anyway,
hit me.
Back on topic. My Twitter handle is at Mason_Young_0. You can hit me with the follow there.
Austin, should they follow you?
I guess if you want to. At Austin Curtright. If you can spell it, sure.
And Justin the Jayne.
At Justin__Jayne.
2 underscores.
Awesome.
That's
and
bold.
as always, thank you to Georgia Bomar for editing this podcast. You can follow her on Twitter at GeorgiaBomar02. With that said, thank you so much for listening. For all your OU Daily football needs, stay tuned to @OUDaily.com, and we will see you